Last Monday, I had the unique opportunity of sitting down to dinner with our nation's Undersecretary of State, Rose Gottemoeller. She made it clear that she prefers to go by Rose, which was fine. She is the State Department's top arms control official. Now, it's a job that I would have dreamed of having for myself perhaps some 20 or 30 years ago, but today I could only feel sympathy for the person entrusted with such an overwhelming and virtually impossible objective, given the gridlock in Washington and the huge disdain these days for anything that smacks of peace, health, and the environment. In our polarized nation, torn to the point of total dysfunctionality, the Republican-led House Armed Services Committee approved language that would actually prevent the United States Energy Department from using fiscal funds next year in 2015 for any, and I quote, for any contract, cooperation, or transfer of technology between the United States and Russia until the crisis in the Ukraine has been resolved. So this makes no sense. So rather than keeping our security inspectors in Russia during this moment of crisis between Russia and the United States, Republicans want to isolate Russia where we can't even work with them on preventing nuclear bombs from getting into the hands of terrorists. Something tells me this is not an easy time to aspire towards a nuclear-free world, but we must. In returning to a Cold War mentality, manifesting an intractable, tough guy Republican approach to conflict, the steps taken to ratify the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty next year are coming unglued. Once upon a time, more than 20 years ago, leaders like George Shultz, Henry Kissinger, Sam Nunn, all considered hawks in the military chess game. They still wished to pursue a world where military stockpiles would be completely dismantled. President Ronald Reagan boldly proclaimed, and I quote the president, "There can only be one policy for preserving our precious civilization in this modern age. A nuclear war can never be won and must never be fought." Now, that sentiment today would be dismissed with great contempt. Now, why our Undersecretary of State sat around a table last Monday at Jane's house on South Temple, eating takeout food from Mazza and sipping some wine, why she was there was not entirely clear. The guest list was small. A Baptist minister, a Methodist minister, a Muslim imam, a Quaker, a representative from the social justice group at the Catholic Diocese, one Unitarian minister. Not exactly the power brokers in global affairs. I'd even call the dinner a bit surreal. Local clergy tied to their respective little congregations in Salt Lake City with scant knowledge of diplomacy, meeting, having dinner with the top honcho of the free world, charged with reducing, even eliminating, nuclear weapons around the world. Although enjoying hobnobbing with a top state official, I had to confess, this doesn't look too promising. Even the premise of our gathering stood on shaky ground from the beginning. Rose aims to build public support to pressure the Senate into ratifying the treaty, a treaty that was first brought to the table by President Bill Clinton in 1999. the Senate never took up the cause in all these intervening years. It reminds me of the poem in our reading this morning where nobody noticed the giant holding the H-bomb right outside the house. And so the State Department intends now to link the elimination of nuclear warheads to a moral position, thus aiming to involve the interfaith community. For some reason, I thought it always was a moral issue. I mean, having the power to make life on this planet extinct seems like it belongs in the moral problem-solving category. Exacerbating the problem is that the United States is one of just 7 nations worldwide refusing to ratify the treaty. This renders all our rhetoric about peace as, well, simply moot. By building public support, Rose contends, the Senate will yield to what is right. And here's where I get lost in the logic of the argument. In 1999, when the Senate had its first chance to ratify the Test Ban Treaty, polls showed numbers placing public support of the treaty at a whopping 85%. I'd even label that a mandate by the American people, a mandate that failed to yield the fruits of peace. And so I, kind of with a stutter, asked Rose how it was possible in today's polarized American society, how we could even begin to imagine approaching anything like 85% support. Unlikely that we could get anything close to the support we once savored seems virtually impossible. So what do we do now that's different? And she said we need a new alliance that included young adults and religious organizations doing a better job of writing their senators than they did in 1999. Writing their senators. And I thought to myself, is this how far we've come in the past 15 years? Relying on local clergy and youth to motivate people to contact their senators? I mean, is there anything more urgent that precludes the Senate from ratifying the treaty? Is there anything more concrete or more positive or more hopeful that we can put forth now in the 21st century? The times now are so precarious, where relationships among nations and cultures are more tenuous than ever. It seems like, well, why don't we just keep on singing? All we're saying is give peace a chance. It seems that that's about the same kind of power we have today. It's no wonder that the millennial generation, those born after 1981, have so little regard for, let alone faith in, any kind of institution, especially government. And I asked Rose how the millennials could even be expected to identify with this new, re-emerging Cold War insanity and deal with the fact that our nuclear weapons are still on alert status 24/7. And we've got these nuclear warheads ready to go in a millisecond, just ready to go. I mean, how can any 30-year-old possibly muster any enthusiasm now to turn things around? And Rose sympathized with the millennials, all coming of age post-Cold War, and she added that they needed to be told, quite frankly, this is what you've inherited, and it's now your responsibility to help us work in eliminating the evils and atrocious threats of nuclear war. we left it at that. In an effort to convince Senators Hatch and Lee to kindly reconsider, and that's a word she used a lot. She is one of the most lovely people I've ever met. But to approach, Mike Lee kindly hoping, I thought, well, all right. Anyway, in efforts to get Senators Hatch and Senator Lee to kindly reconsider the implications of not signing the treaty next year, what did she do but make an appointment with the LDS Church that morning? Surely they could represent the moral argument, she figured, for a reduction of nuclear warheads pointing so precariously at nations around the world. So that Monday morning, she had an appointment with, anybody care to guess? Elder Dallin Oaks. If the local interfaith clergy could agree on one thing, it would be that Elder Oaks may not have been the best choice for her to meet. But be that as it may, she was heartened by the meeting and his willingness to help. But here's what I thought was the most interesting thing of all. Elder Oaks informed her that in Mormonism, there was no teaching, there was no text that actually supported her policy. But he would nevertheless try to open doors for her to have access to the Mormon media, both print and television. No text? Well, I'm not that familiar with Mormon scriptures, so as soon as I returned home, I searched for some validation of this claim that nothing in the Book of Mormon gave voice to working towards a peaceful world. Well, I found references in Doctrines and Covenants to thine enemy is in thine hands and thou art justified, leaving one with the impression that it's really up to the individual to decide how to deal with so-called enemies. And then there was the ambiguous, not to go into battle, save the Lord command you. And the book of Alma says, be prepared to meet your enemies. There's no indication of whether to meet your enemies in the manner of General Douglas MacArthur or Gandhi. Just be prepared, whatever that means. So Elder Oaks may well have been right. I'm sure some of you would know differently. But it seems to me, after my scanning whatever research was available, whatever material was available, that he was right. There is not much text to support the cause for peace. And then I thought, should that really matter? The teachings of peace, love, and restraint inherent in Scripture from all cultures around the world are readily dismissed anyway, with absurd justifications for war that stem mainly from paranoia and hubris. The goal, I believe, ought to aim at providing moral clarity rather than seeking revealed truth. We need to understand more viscerally the consequences of aggression, especially in these times where delineated battlefields no longer exist. The victims now are untold numbers of civilians, women, and children decimated by drones, indiscriminate bombings, landmines. And morally speaking, there really is no difference between the mere possibility that a nuclear holocaust will bring about extinction and the scientific certainty of that. Morally, they are the same.